Did any of you see little Magawa on the news last week? I thought about showing a picture of him today, but I know that not everybody likes looking at rats. Magawa is a rat. He's an African pouched rat, and he's got the job of finding landmines in Cambodia. Landmines are pretty despicable weapons, and one of the many reasons that makes them despicable is that landmines don't tell the time. They don't work to a calendar. So a war begins, soldiers start hiding landmines in the ground, and eventually the war will end and peace is agreed and people go home again. But the landmines are still out there, hidden in the ground. Nobody goes round collecting them back up. And so years later, innocent people are still discovering them by accident and then blowing themselves up in places like Cambodia. One of the good things that Princess Diana did was to lend her name to the campaign to do much more to rid the world of these monstrous weapons, and Cambodia was one of the places that she visited. But even today in that country, the slow work of clearing landmines goes on, and the reason why the work is slow is that it's so dangerous. So now they started training rats to do the work. Magawa is the name of the rat who has managed to detect the biggest amount of landmines so far. If you want some stats, he's already cleared the equivalent of 20 football pitches. Or how about this one? A human with a metal detector would take 4 days to clear the size of a tennis court. Magawa can do that in just 30 minutes. So he got in the news, and the charity that trains him got in the news because the People's Dispensary for Sick Animals, the PDSA, decided to honour his work with an award. And the gold medal that they gave is the equivalent of the animal equivalent of the George Cross. And this award is given for bravery. The PDSA said that the gold medal was awarded for life-saving bravery and devotion to duty. Now, it's a wee bit funny giving Magawa a bravery award, because Magawa isn't actually being brave because he's got no sense of danger in what he's doing. And in fact, not only that, Magawa isn't even in any danger. His body weight is so light that he wouldn't even trigger a landmine if he stepped all over it. Now, I'm not criticising Magawa and his pals and suggesting they should return the Bravery Award. Well done to him, well done to his colleagues for all the good work that they're doing. I'm just making the point that Magawa is doing a great thing, even though he doesn't know why he's doing it. Magawa doesn't think he's doing anything brave. He's not putting himself out for a cause bigger than himself. He's not trying to be selfless. He's not thinking about the greater good. He doesn't even know what a landmine is. All he knows is that when he finds one of these things and taps it with his claws, then he's going to get a treat. He's going to get a reward from his trainer. So Magawa is providing a great service to the world without even knowing it. Seems to me that the people of Israel in today's reading were in exactly the opposite position of Magawa. Magawa is doing something very good, not knowing why. But the people of Israel were totally aware of what they should be doing, but just didn't do it. In the parable that Jesus tells, the vineyard stands for this world, the owner stands for God, and the tenants in the story, well, these are the people of Israel. And this nation and God are bound together in a relationship, but the Israelites keep breaking it. They love being the people of God. They love boasting about that. They love feeling superior to other neighbours. They love the privileges of being God's people, but refuse to take up their responsibilities. They took the blessings of God, but didn't want to give anything back. So the servants in the story came to tell them what God wanted from them. They stood for the prophets all through the ages. But instead of listening to the prophets, they gave them a hard time. The prophets were mistreated and misused and beaten up. At best they were ignored. At worst they were killed. And then God sends Jesus. God, the owner of the vineyard, sends his own son, and then they turn against him. And they have him executed. And think of this. Jesus is telling this story in Jerusalem just after Palm Sunday. And this is only a couple of days before he will literally be put to death. It wasn't that God didn't speak. God is always speaking. But people chose not to hear anything that might ask something of them. They want the blessings of God for themselves. They wanted God to give and answer their prayers and look after them and their families. But they didn't want to do anything. All through the pages of the Bible, the relationship between God and God's people was a rocky one. And of course, it still is today. So, can we drag this story, this first century story about the relationship between God and his people from the first century to the 21st century and imagine Jesus using that story today and speaking to our situation? Well, today's Harvest Sunday, and it's an unusual day in church. We go to churches and they're filled with, often they're filled up with special decorations of flowers and fruit and corn and all kinds of things. And it's a wee bit twee, maybe, a slightly strange day. And that's because our lifestyles have changed. Because for most of us at least, we don't live in an agricultural society really. We're less used to living on the land. So Harvest Sunday comes along and it's like a wee bit of days long ago, a sort of dated thing, even though the land and the farms and the seasons and the produce is all vital to our lives. We might not see the farms and the orchards and the livestock, we might not see tractors going past our doors at Glasgow, but these are things that make life possible and they're very important. And because we live not so close to the action anymore, it's even more important than ever that we take time to remind ourselves of its importance. Harvest is a time for us to remind ourselves of what is still true and always true, our connection to the world around us and our dependence on it. And from times past, there's always been two great themes to this Sunday. One has been giving thanks for the blessings of creation, for all the beauty and the wonder that's around us here on earth. It's a time to give thanks, to remember the wonderful things that we are in danger of sometimes taking for granted. And then the other thing about harvest, the other big theme, is this recognition that the resources given to us by God have not been shared out equally. And some of us are living in luxury and others of us are starving to death. And so harvest is also a time to remember our responsibility to share on an individual level and on an international level. To do things to allow people to have a decent life here on earth. It's a time to recognise our responsibility to share. So thanks and sharing have always been the two big themes of harvest, and they're still important. But I think that it's time to recognise another aspect that needs to be added, uniquely in our time. As well as giving thanks to God, and as well as sharing the gifts of God around us, it's today as much a reminder to us of what we know now that we didn't know before. We know that our world is in peril, that the balance of nature is under threat. We know about climate change and the effect it's having. We know about the erosion of species the running out of natural resources. We know about ice caps that are melting and our need to change tack. We know we've exploited and polluted and mistreated our world for many years, and most of that time it's been done without much thinking or understanding. But it's now that we know these things, and it's now that we need to act. You know, when the dust settles and we learn a bit more, we will almost certainly come to recognise that this horrible virus around us called COVID is connected up with our human propensity to take shortcuts and to fail to take proper care of our world. The virus is just one particularly horrible manifestation of our failure to treat our planet with respect. This is the world that God has made, and it's in trouble, and we have a responsibility to take that fact seriously. We have a responsibility as humans because we live on this planet, and we have a responsibility as Christians because the world is God's, and God has called us to be good stewards of creation. Because we know we have a responsibility. Jesus was angry with the people in the parable, with the hearers, not just because they weren't doing what was right. He was angry because they knew fine well what they should have been doing. They knew what God wanted them to do. They knew what God was asking of them. So let us, on this Harvest Sunday, remember things we often take for granted. Let's give thanks for this world and all its good gifts. Let's be thankful to God for what we've been given. And let's also remember our responsibility to help others who struggle, whether that's aid to the other side of the world or donations to the Lodging House Mission right here in the city of Glasgow. And let's admit too that we know now about the trouble facing our planet as a whole. Let's not look away from that. Let's not bury our heads. Let us, as individuals and as a church, find ways to respond, to begin to heal the damage, by working for change, by demanding more action from our elected representatives, and by doing our bit for change wherever we are. May it be so. Thanks be to God.